Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host, Cole Anderson. Today I'm just going to be doing a relatively short video. It's in response to a question that one of my viewers posted on one of my more recent videos on Myra Hess. So this is from Neil Killeen, who's been a follower of the channel for quite some time, and we correspond a little bit here and there. He was talking about Granados Goyescas number 4, The Lady and the Nightingale. This was in reference to Myra Hess. She has a beautiful recording of it. So Neil says, and I'll quote what he actually said. He said he learned the piece about 2 years ago, and he didn't come across her recording at the time, so it was new to him. And beautiful performance. And so after listening to it, he tried picking the Maha and the Nightingale, this piece by Goyescas, back up and playing it again, and he says it was like he'd never played it before in his life. And it's a very difficult piece and very complicated with some hand crossings at certain points. And when he first learned it, he couldn't play the hand crossings for months. However, after 2 or 3 goes, and he has all the fingerings marked into the music, it started to resurrect itself, and he feels that he could get it back fully in a couple of weeks. So how do we go about keeping pieces reasonably current in our repertoire so that they can be sensibly reactivated on demand? And then he also adds in as a little afterthought that he memorizes very poorly, so that doesn't help him out too much. So this is a really great question, and it's one that I've thought about quite a bit over the years. I've always noticed that certain pieces will come back into my fingers and my brain much more rapidly. Other ones will seem to be much more recalcitrant, and I set out to discover why that was and what was the defining factor behind these occurrences. And what I discovered was that the pieces which I had already either dropped and worked back up again multiple times, or pieces also that I had performed several times, are always the pieces that come back to my fingers and more rapidly. So for instance, let's say in Neil's case with the 4th piece from Goyescas, let's say that he learned it to a very, very strong place and then dropped it for not quite so long a time, not as long as 2 years perhaps. Say you dropped it for a month and worked on other things during that time, and then you came back to it after it had been sitting for a while and refreshed it. Probably you'd find that it was a little bit more rapid to bring it back than if you waited for 2 years. However, it would take a little bit of effort. It might feel like it had completely disappeared from your fingers. That's usually the point where I notice that I feel a little bit more like it's gone is after about a month or so. And let's say that you repeated this, so you worked however long you needed to really get the piece back until it felt super solid, and then maybe even give a performance for someone or made a recording of it for yourself. And then you dropped it again for another month, or maybe even a little longer this time, maybe a month and a half or 2 months. You'd probably find the next time you brought it back, it was quite a bit easier to remember everything, and your fingers were just falling right back into place almost immediately. Rinse and repeat. Let's say you do that 3, 4, 5 times in a row. You drop it, you bring it back, work it up to a really high degree, and maybe each time you leave a little bit more time. Also, this is all totally approximation, so you might find that you only need to drop the piece for a couple of weeks at first to feel like it's completely gone and it's a fresh start when you start again. But I think each time that you do this, you can wait a little bit of a longer period before you start again. I think going through this process is really what leads to the strongest possible retention of repertoire. And by the way, this also connects into memory. So what you're talking about memorizing poorly, I think most people memorize much better than they think, because oftentimes the problem is not memorizing, it's feeling like you can remember, especially under pressure, whenever you feel a little bit nervous, when you're recording, when you're performing, and so forth. Now, it just so happens I don't particularly care about memory that much anymore. I had enough traumatic experiences with memory of performing pieces that I just memorized and having teeny little memory slips that just totally threw me for a loop and caused me to lose confidence that nowadays, I just perform with the score and I don't really care about it, especially since it's so easy to do that with iPads and pedals and so forth. And I find now that I'm not putting pressure on my memory, I actually remember things a lot better and retain things a lot longer. So most of my repertoire, especially repertoire which is technically difficult and which I practice a lot anyway, I'm going to remember quite well, even though I don't really put it to the test. Having said that, though, I think that this whole method of dropping and refreshing repertoire is also a great way to train your memory and to solidify your memory. And when I was just thinking about this and researching this video a little bit, I found this quote from Alberto Jonas. If you haven't heard of this pedagogue before, Alberto Jonas, he was active, I think, in the early part of the 20th century, and he had a few really good students. I'm not sure if any of them would be on the roll call of the biggest names of the century, but really, really solid students. And he was in close contact with all the great pianists of the day, as well as being a really formidable pianist himself. And he has this series of books called the Master School of Piano Virtuosity. It's, I believe, 7 volumes. For a long, long time, it was out of print since it was first published in the early part of the 20th century. But then I think recently it went back into print. You can actually purchase it now. I found it for the first time in a library in the Oberlin Music Library when I was a student there. It's a fascinating collection of books because he has all these unique exercises that he got from great pianists of the day. So, for example, there are exercises that were contributed by Busoni or Rachmaninoff or Joseph Levine, among others. And he puts them all together along with selections of his own from the exercise repertoire and from the etude repertoire as a cohesive method to develop piano technique. And not only piano technique, though, he also discusses musical points. He discusses pedaling, he discusses expression, how to make the piano sound expressive, how to memorize, how to perform, all these sort of things that go into the total picture of being a great performer and a great pianist. So in volume 6 of this series, he has a section on memorizing, and he has a very interesting thing that he says about retention, which is related to what I was just talking about. So here's the quote. After a piece has been memorized, it should be played by heart once every day the first week, every other day the second week, twice a week the third week, and after that once a week for 6 weeks. By the aid of the calendar, it is easy to mark beforehand the dates on which a particular piece is to be played. This mode of procedure will systematically refresh and strengthen the first memorized performance and ensure for many years the faithful remembrance of all the pieces which are treated in like manner. Mr. Funman will find that the memory has become keen and quick to gather and strong to retain. So a very interesting thing. Maybe that's a little bit too rigid of a system. I'm not sure if you need to follow that to the letter, although it could be instructive to try. And if anyone out there is interested in experimenting with this system of retaining memory and reports back after the period that he's outlining here with results, good or bad, I'd be very interested to hear what your experience is. At the very least, though, the general idea is a very interesting one, and I think a very telling one, with gradually increasing intervals between looking at the piece again. I think that really is the trick to this kind of retention that Neil was talking about in his comment. One other important aspect to this as well is how well you learn the piece, which of course is something Neil already mentioned in his comment. So for instance, if you make very thorough fingerings for the difficult passages, that's going to help you very much when you go to bring a piece back. There are other less obvious aspects that you can study in the music as well, which will also help you to do this. For instance, if you make a very thorough harmonic analysis and structural analysis of the piece so that you really understand the nitty-gritty details as much as possible as if you had written the piece yourself. So you know how all the motives connect to each other, how the structure flows together, what key you're in at any given place, what that really strange chord is in that one particular place. You know, all those kind of little details, if you really know what's going on, that just means that you have more connections to the score, you have more connections that you've made in your brain. That's just going to help you when you're bringing the piece back as well. And then the last thing, of course, was the whole thing about performing as well. So the more you perform a piece, the better you remember it, the better you're able to bring it back later. And it's quite interesting why this would be so. I think that if you consider the sort of incredible focus and attention that we develop when we are performing for people, you realize what this does for you. When you practice, there's oftentimes a certain amount of coasting that you can get away with because you're not too focused on any particular difficult section. You just you practice it. You have as much freedom as you want to repeat things until you get it right. And if you get something wrong, it's no big deal. When we're in the situation where people are watching us, or even if it's just a recording device which is picking up our sound and which we might have to listen to later, we right away become much more hyper-focused on every little detail. I oftentimes like to tell my students it's kind of like doing the dishes. There's nothing that crazy about doing the dishes, especially if you're in the habit of doing them every day. It's something that you've practiced quite a bit and you're quite good at it. But imagine that you were in an arena with 25,000 people watching you do the dishes. You'd probably feel pretty weird, and you'd start analyzing every little movement that you did. Am I using the sponge here, or should I use like a steel wool for this? Or you might feel very, very self-conscious. It's the same thing with music. Even things that we've practiced meticulously over a long period of time, we just start to notice things that we weren't really paying attention to before once we're in that kind of situation. But the good news is that that does an incredible amount of good for our knowledge of the piece and our ability to retain it. Not to mention that it also opens up certain avenues of expression and inspiration, which might not have been there when we're practicing. So that's why I always recommend, even if you're just at home practicing for yourself, you're not a concert pianist, you don't want to be a concert pianist, it's still worthwhile finding opportunities once in a while to share your music with other people, because it's not only enriching for the other people, it's also enriching for you, and it deepens your knowledge of the music that you're playing. So it's a good reminder, even if it's just having your dog listen to you or just recording. That's already a step in the right direction, because you're there, you have to play, you have to finish getting through the entire piece. But there really is nothing quite like playing for live people, especially if you have a little bit of an audience, at least 10 or 15. Then you start to feel nervous in a way you don't when you're playing just by yourself. And as a very low stakes, low stress way of doing this, you could also just visit a local retirement community where they might have a piano in a living area. And oftentimes they're quite happy to just have people come and play the piano for a while, and residents will come and listen, and that can be a wonderful way to just share your music. It doesn't feel quite as nervous as a real concert. It can be a little bit more informal like that, and people really appreciate it. I know I did that very, very frequently when I was living in an area where that was possible to do. So it's another great option. So just throwing that out there, that's another way that you can just deepen your understanding of the music, your connection to the music, which will in turn help you to bring it back more rapidly. Well, that's a fairly short video. That's really all I had to say about that. It's a very interesting idea though, and if you have any thoughts about this, please do leave a comment and let me know. I'd be very interested to hear any other points of view, any other reactions that you might have to this idea. For the time being though, I'm going to wrap it up because I'm having a very short vacation this weekend just to kind of relax myself. I have been practicing the Liszt Sonata very hard, and I've made several takes of it. However, I'm not quite there yet. It's such a big piece and so hard to pull it all together. Also, I've been noticing that my hand's been a little tired the past couple days, so kind of need to give myself a little bit of a break, I think, over the weekend. I guess I've just been banging a few too many octaves out, because I've also been practicing Liszt's Orage, which is all octaves as well. So, for the time being, we'll wrap it up. And next time, I'll bring you some more conversation. I might dive into the comment section of my video where I talked about Marta Argerich a little bit, just to kind of have some fun and look at some of those comments. But until then, take care, keep practicing, and I'll see you next time.